Fred Rogers was a totally unique person in the history of television. And it's not even that he was ahead of his time. I think he's out of time. Like, there was nobody before or since who's done what he did. And he came up with this idea that he was going to do a kid show that was really about speaking to children one-on-one through the lens and helping them navigate the difficult things in the world. So it's not just fun and games and, you know, clowns and things. It was like, I'm going to tell you how to process all the difficult, confusing things that happen for children. I think he really had this incredible sense of what children needed.
There are some amazing parallels and that are so timely about what's going on right now with our, I guess you could call it divided society. Was that one of the compelling themes for you?
Well, absolutely, because essentially what Fred Rogers was doing was talking about, won't you be my neighbor? He's saying, you know, first of all, he's saying, love thy neighbor. He was a Presbyterian minister, so it came from a kind of a Christian theology and understanding that way. But really what he's talking about is, how do we live together? How do we treat each other? What kind of society are we going to have? I mean, these are fundamental questions of kind of civility and kindness. And it just feels like we live in a culture where not that many people are advocating for those things. Many people have found that it's easier to get, you know, ratings or votes or whatever by pitting one group against another. So how do we kind of get back to first principles of how we should live together in our neighborhood? What kind of a country are we going to have? What kind of a neighborhood are we going to have?
How did you even decide that this is a topic we're spending, I don't know how many years
Well,
on?
a couple of years. I mean, I was born in 1967. The show went on in 1968. So I was like Gen 1 Mr. Rogers fanatic. So I loved the show when I was a kid. And then, like most people, I didn't think about him for decades. But then over the last 10 years, he kept coming back into my life. I had children. Other people I knew were talking about him. I did a film with Yo-Yo Ma, who was good friends with Fred, and would talk about him. And it finally occurred to me that, like, this, it wasn't that I wanted to go back in a nostalgic way. It was, how do we get that voice into the culture today? Like this kind of empathetic, warm, loving voice that's helping us to process the difficulties of our culture. And like, it just felt like therapy for me to make it, and hopefully for an audience too. I feel like if you sanctified him, and if you didn't appreciate the struggle that he put in and the work he put in to do this, that it makes you feel like, well, you know, he was a saint, you know, I don't have to measure up to it. And I feel like I really wanted this film to ask a lot of the audience and say, well, what are you going to do to make your neighborhood better? What are you going to do to make our society better? You know, what's our communal responsibility? And that was really the thing that drove me to make the film. It's daunting to be as kind of pure and principled as he was. But at the same time, I feel like it's made me be more pure and principled in my choices as a filmmaker and as a, you know, TV producer.
And as a parent too, that's probably shaped you a lot.
You know,
shaped the projects that you choose.
Sure. I mean, every project you choose is something you want to actually investigate in yourself, or something you want to put out there in the world. You know, these are big decisions, how much of your life you're going to spend on these things. So you want it to say something positive. And this was something that turned out to be so much deeper and so much more profound than I ever imagined, that I'm still just processing it. It's amazing.
Yeah. I'm curious what you've learned about yourself as a storyteller, whether you see recurring themes coming up in your work that you hadn't seen before, or new levels of...
I mean, I think, you know, I've always been a cultural storyteller, meaning I've made films and TV shows about music and film and art and language and food, and these, you know, I'm interested in culture, the idea of culture, because it's how we define ourselves, it's how we define other people, and it's kind of the underappreciated kind of connective tissue between everybody in the world is culture. So I've tried to make films about culture and TV shows about culture where we tend to have something in our lives that we know, but we don't actually appreciate the power that they have. And whether that's backup singers or, music or art or food, or somebody like Mr. Rogers, you realize the power it had, and there's no way to measure it. There's no way to say, because Mr. Rogers existed, we're 15% more empathetic as a culture.
Right.
Like, you can't measure it, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that it didn't have a profound effect. And so I feel like just the fact that people have responded to the film shows that it touched people in this profound way, and they're just waiting for an opportunity to recognize that, profundity, So those are the stories I love to tell.
Is there advice that you would give to documentary filmmakers starting out?
I mean, it's kind of a golden era of documentary right now. There's so much more of it being done, and there's so much more of an audience for documentary than when I started. I've been doing this for 25 years, so that's exciting. The technology, the means of making films is so much more accessible than it was when I started, so that's amazing. The thing that I've always come back to is just do the work. I came out of journalism originally, and it's just tell as many stories as you can, and you'll get better and better at it. So, a lot of people kind of get caught up with one project for 10 years, and at least I can't function that way. It's like I want to tell as many stories as I can. So the idea of just getting into it and doing the work, because in the documentary world, you can't control everything. So the more times you roll the dice, the better the odds that you're going to have that perfect story that's going to hit, or this amazing thing that's going to happen that's not expected. And that's what happens in documentary at its best, is it surprises you. And that's what makes great films.